Between the two world wars, the 6 Mitford sisters were the it girls of English society. But 2 of the sisters threw all of that away, becoming loyal followers of dark political movements of the time. In the Mitford Affair, historical novelist Marie Benedict explores the motivations behind the sisters' deep dive into fascism and even Nazism. Hey, it's Kathy with HEC Books, where you can hear about the latest books straight from the author. If you like these sort of interviews, please click on the subscribe button, and we'll keep you up to date with the newest content. Novelist Marie Benedict joins us now to talk about her newest book, The Mitford Affair. So Marie Benedict, it's great to have you here today to talk about The Mitford Affair.
I'm so thrilled to be here talking to you guys.
The Mitford sisters are such interesting people. Real characters. You write historical novels. Will you tell us a little bit about the Mitford sisters?
They're hard to encapsulate because there's 6 of them, and each one was more brilliant, beautiful, eccentric than the next. You know, they really, together, they were sort of the aristocratic it girls in Great Britain in the 1920s and 30s. And at the outset, they found themselves to be fixtures on the society pages. But as time went on, they were fixtures in the headlines for very different reasons.
They came of age and were living in such interesting times in Great Britain between the 2 world wars.
That's right.
And there was a lot of things looming at that particular time. And they got very involved politically.
So just to put a little bit of it in context, when I think, and I think a lot of people, when they think about the interwar period, you know, that really crucial segment between World War I and World War II, we think of, you know, the continent of Europe as struggling between fascism and communism. You know, there's these powerhouses like Nazi Germany and Mussolini in Italy and in Spain, where fascism is really taking hold. And then, of course, communism is really becoming a force. The Mitford sisters, though sort of not terribly political, at least some of them, at the beginning of this time period, as the years progress, they become swept up in these movements, communism and fascism, that are gaining, strength in Great Britain. And they start to then not just be swept up in it, but sweep it up themselves. They start to really become forces in both of those movements. So it was fascinating and horrible at once to watch. When our book opens, and this is, I don't think, a spoiler because it's really from page 1, the sisters are sort of in their prime of their social life, right? They're the bright young things of Great Britain. The 4th sister down, Unity, is being hosted to a great ball at her sister Diana's, one of her many homes. Diana is married to the heir to the Guinness beer fortune. And yet, looming on the scene is the threat of fascism in the form of Sir Oswald Mosley. He is the head of the British Union of Fascists, and Diana has fallen desperately in love with him. And she's one of the sisters who wasn't terribly political, and yet as she becomes obsessed with the man, she becomes obsessed with the movement, and she tries to bring her sisters along for the ride. Now, one of the sisters, Unity, is happy to go along for the ride because Unity, the 4th sister down, probably the most peculiar of the sisters. You know, they're each beautiful and brilliant in their own way and social creatures. But Unity's, you know, just to put it this way, she brings her pet rat and pet snake with her to balls. Right? I mean, here she is. She's got a little rat on her shoulder.
A little quirky.
Right. She's very quirky. Of course, I write fiction, so I'm inspired by the real character. I really feel like she was trying to find her place among this glittering group of sisters. And from a young age, from her teenage years, she decides that fascism is going to become her thing. Now, you know, when I started to read this, I'm like, a teenage girl, like, into fascism? Oh, we're talking like 14. And when I put it in the context of what was happening, not just in continental Europe, but in England at the time, I could see there actually was a rather large faction of the population who believed in fascism. But just to show you how it was playing out in their own house, Unity shared a bedroom with the next sister down, Jessica, who's not one of our 3 main characters, but she does figure kind of prominently in the story. Unity, having, you know, identified with fascism, decides she's going to decorate her side of the bedroom with all the emblems of fascism, right? She's got the swastika, portraits of Hitler and Mussolini, all this kind of stuff. Jessica is, you know, rightly so, not happy about that and paints a line down the middle of the bedroom. And in response to Unity's proclamation of fascism, she announces that because Unity's a fascist, she's going to become a communist. And she literally decorates her side of the bedroom with, the hammer and sickle and busts of Lenin and Stalin. So that this kind of battle that's playing out in Europe overall is actually like playing out in one of the Mitford sister bedrooms.
So you're right that Diana falls head over heels and really throws her lot in with Oswald Mosley.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was in the real person? Why would she have done that?
Why would you? Well, that's something I struggled with. Because to be honest, here she was in many ways this very idyllic marriage. Not only was Brian Guinness fabulously wealthy, he was strikingly handsome. He was absolutely enamored of her. And in many ways, he was considered kind of the catch of the season, and they married at 18. The two of them become luminaries in the English social scene. They have 2 young children. I honestly think Diana, who was considered the most beautiful girl of her generation, she was extremely bright, I think she was bored. I think there was nothing challenging about this life that she had found herself in. I mean, I think most people could have probably made do, figured it out. And Mosley, more than anyone she had met, challenged her. First of all, he was married, right? He wasn't going to give up his wife for her. He was this charismatic leader of this movement that she felt might be the future of Great Britain. And there was a challenge, there was a role for her in that context. And so I think those things really played a huge role in her being so attracted to this man and so swept up in his belief systems that she would actually leave her own husband, which of course was really not done at that time. It was well known she was leaving him, divorcing him for a married man. She was just setting herself up to be Oswald Mosley's mistress, and she had 2 children. And she just, scandal aside, she just went for it. And so it was really a shocking move, and one that she never wavered on, not in any of the decades that followed.
And then there's Unity, who really is quite an admirer, more than an admirer, really part of Hitler's inside circle at some point.
Well, right, because what happens is she sees Diana stepping into this role at Mosley's side, unofficially, the first Lady of Fascism, because of course he has a wife that he won't leave. But Unity sees this happen, and at first she's all in too. She's at the rallies. They even get Nancy at one point, the eldest sister who's a novelist, to join in, although she quickly kind of sees through it. But Unity always had this desire to stand out, to make her own mark. And I think once Diana really sort of threw her lot in with fascism, it wasn't just Unity's thing anymore. And I almost feel like she wanted to take it up a notch. And so what she does is she decamps to Munich. She told her parents that she was going to go to finishing school in Munich and learn German. And that is what she did do, but the reality is she rarely went to her German classes, and instead she embarked on this plan to stalk Adolf Hitler. And it's just like mind-boggling to look back and think about it. Here she was, this teenage girl, so willful, so unusual, finds out Adolf Hitler's daily schedule when he's in Munich, where he has lunch, where he has his afternoon coffee, what times he walks around a particular park or square. And she puts herself in his path day after day after day, multiple times a day, until he invites her over for lunch. To me, if I were Adolf Hitler, I would think I would get rid of this woman, right? It would seem. But you know what? There was something very attractive about Unity. She was an aristocratic British girl who was cousins with Winston Churchill. Now, Winston Churchill was not the prime minister at this time. He was out of power because he was banging the drums, trying to get everyone's attention about the threat of the Nazis. And Great Britain was really following a political path of appeasement at that time towards Hitler and his machinations. So, for him, if he could show the world that Churchill's cousin, this attractive, aristocratic English girl, was an adherent of Nazism, then what's there to be scared of, right? And so he featured her on newspapers. He had her at his side at rallies, at the Olympics. But she wasn't alone, because very soon there was Diana. Diana saw that getting in there, exploiting Unity's relationship, not just with Hitler, but really the whole inner circle who she became close with, was a way for Diana, to forge an alliance with the Nazis on Mosley's behalf for the British Union of Fascists. And so off she trots to Germany, telling everyone she's just going to keep an eye on Unity, which is something she never felt particularly compelled to do beforehand. And suddenly it's not just Unity in the newspaper articles, it's Diana too. And Diana's there in the inner circle as well.
All of their involvement, everything was with the men, the powerful men. They clung to a powerful man to give them access to places where they could, Unity and Diana in particular, could, express themselves in some sort of professional way, I guess, and be influential.
Right. I mean, I think these girls, they were raised in a very unusual way, even for the time. They were, I liken them to feral cats. Right? They grew up wealthy, although their funds were diminishing. They were titled. Their father had multiple estates, but one by one they were being sold off, and they were living in a series of ever more crumbling English country estates. The parents did not believe in formal education for the girls, so they basically kind of self-educated with the family library, and then they otherwise were left to their own devices. And, you can imagine with a group of really smart 6 sisters, there's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of factions being formed. They form their own languages that are only taught to a couple of them. They have secret nicknames. Sisters. And all of those things are forging these sisters, honing them. And then they're kind of let loose in the world. And like you said, what do we do now? Now, Nancy, of course, found an outlet with her writing. When our story opens, she's published, I think it's 3 novels, and she actually publishes 2 novels during the course of the book that are very specifically tied to the war and what her sisters are up to. I don't know that maybe even until my book, or maybe more tangentially, people realized exactly how specifically this was tied to her own sisters and what was going on. But those books are, I think, really her attempt to open up their and others' eyes to the reality of what's going on around them. But the other sisters are kind of cast adrift. What they were told to do is marry well. That was the whole point of being introduced into society, becoming a debutante, which of course they all were. And of course Diana did exactly that. But it was just all too easy. It wasn't challenging. She was very bright. And in many ways, Mosley always held himself back from her. She always had to continuously woo him and become indispensable to him. And so it was a constant challenge. I mean, you hate to think of that as a necessity for her or her purpose, but in many ways I almost think that's what it was. And then you have poor Unity, who's just adrift. I don't feel too badly for her because she made some terrible choices, but I think the reason that she was motivated towards those choices were kind of tragic reasons in a way, unlike Diana, who very much understood what she was getting into.
Well, such a fascinating book.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me about it.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to click the thumbs up and subscribe for new content. In the next part of our interview, Marie Benedict reveals some of her process of researching historical fiction and how she dealt with writing about a dark time in history.